The halls of Whitfield General Hospital were quiet at 3:40 in the morning, the particular kind of quiet that settles only in places where people are either fighting for their lives or trying to forget that others are. Jonah Morrow moved through it the way he always did. Steady, unhurried, one hand resting on the radio clipped to his belt, and the other carrying a paper cup of gas station coffee that had gone cold somewhere around 2 a.m. He knew every corner of this building. Every flickering exit sign, every door that needed a shoulder to open properly, every night nurse who nodded without speaking because she'd been on for 10 hours and still had 4 to go. He passed the third-floor break room and checked through the small rectangular window in the door. Inside, curled on the vinyl couch under his jacket, was Abby. 9 years old, her dark hair tangled from sleep, her backpack slumped against the armrest with a half-finished spelling worksheet still folded under the zipper. She'd started running a fever at pickup, and the babysitter had canceled, and Jonah had no backup plan that didn't involve a neighbor he hadn't spoken to in 2 months or a phone call he wasn't ready to make. So he'd brought her with him. She'd eaten a granola bar and fell asleep asking him whether hospitals were scary at night. He told her they were actually the least scary places in the world after dark, because everyone inside was paying very close attention. He believed that. He had believed it once in a different way, when he was studying exactly how hospitals measured the lives they saved and the lives they lost, in percentages and confidence intervals and peer-reviewed tables, before the numbers stopped being theoretical and became his wife's name on a chart he wasn't allowed to access. That was 6 years ago. The PhD was gone. The research position was gone. Diane was gone. What remained was Abby and the job and the building he walked through every night, making sure the doors were locked and the lights were on and the people inside were still there when morning came. He was rounding the far end of the 4th-floor corridor when he heard the printer. The administrative wing didn't normally run at this hour. The machine was tucked into an alcove near the executive suite, and whatever was printing had been going for long enough that the output tray was nearly full. Jonah stopped. He almost kept walking. The printer wasn't his department, technically, but the paper curling off the tray was thick, formatted, and sliding slowly toward the edge, and picking it up to stack it neatly was the kind of thing he did automatically, because he noticed things and because no one else was awake to notice them. He stacked the pages. The header read, Apex Health Systems, Whitfield General Integration Proposal, Final Summary for Board Approval. He almost set it on the filing cabinet beside the machine and kept moving. Then one number stopped him. It was buried in the Outcomes section, page 8. Apex was presenting its 30-day mortality improvement rate across its acquired hospital network. A clean, compelling 22% reduction compared to independent community hospital averages. The number was formatted with the confidence of a figure that had already won the argument. But Jonah stood in the fluorescent hum of the alcove and felt the same stillness he used to feel in front of a dissertation table that didn't hold. When something obvious was wrong in a way that wasn't immediately obvious why. The comparison window. He read it twice to make sure. The Apex Outcomes data drew from an 18-month window ending in March of last year. Not a rolling 3-year average. Not the standard measurement period for institutional mortality analysis. 18 months ending before the previous April. He didn't know why yet. But he knew that in outcomes research, the window chosen for comparison was either everything or it was a weapon. And no one chose 18 months ending in March unless they were hiding what came before it. He stood with the papers in his hands, looking down the empty hallway toward the executive's suite where through the glass he could see early lights beginning to come on. The board meeting was scheduled for 7 a.m. It was 4:02. By 6:50, the executive conference room on the 5th floor had filled with the particular tension of people preparing to do something irreversible. The board of Whitfield General had been meeting in crisis mode for 3 months. The hospital's operating deficit had reached a point where the word closure was no longer hypothetical. Apex Health Systems had arrived with a lifeline, a full acquisition offer that would absorb the hospital's debt, retain most of the staff for at least 18 months, and keep the doors open for a community that had no other Level 2 trauma center within 40 miles. Dr. Naomi Wells sat at the head of the table. She was 54, compact, with gray at her temples that had appeared 2 years ahead of schedule from the specific stress of watching an institution built across 4 decades slowly run out of room to exist. The merger agreement lay in front of her, 140 pages with 4 signature lines at the back. Her attorney had reviewed it. Her CFO had signed off on it. 2 board members had already expressed relief to her privately, the way people express relief about things they'd stopped believing could be rescued. Roland Klein, the CFO, sat 3 chairs to her left, reviewing his notes with the focused calm of someone who had been in this room for every difficult decision over the past 7 years and had learned how to perform certainty so convincingly that it became indistinguishable from actually having it. The Apex representatives had called in remotely. Their faces occupied the screen at the far end of the room, polished, patient, already mentally distributing the assets. At 6:57, the door opened, not the main door. The side door, the one that connected to the service corridor. It was the door that housekeeping used, and the pharmacy courier, and occasionally the security rotation if a guard needed the faster route between wings. The man who came through it was wearing a Navy security uniform. He was perhaps 38, solidly built, with the quiet posture of someone who had learned how to stand still in rooms where other people were loud. He was holding a small stack of papers. Roland Klein looked up first, irritation arriving before recognition. This floor is secured during board sessions. The man, his badge read J. Morrow, did not step back. I know, sir. I need 2 minutes with Dr. Wheel before she signs anything. Naomi looked across the table at him the way she looked at everything that arrived unexpectedly during crises. Carefully, without dismissing it immediately. What's your name? Jonah Morrow. I'm on night security. I'm sorry for the interruption. He wasn't entirely sorry, which she could hear in the steadiness of his voice. Page 8 of the Apex Outcomes Summary, the mortality rate comparison. The window they used is 18 months, ending March of last year. That's not standard, and I think I know why. Roland set down his pen with a sound that was just loud enough to be intentional. You think you know. He let the pause sit. You're a security guard. Yes, sir. And you have a concern about clinical outcomes methodology. About the time window chosen for comparison, yes. Roland glanced at Naomi with the expression of a man certain he would be rescued from a minor inconvenience. We have Apex's team on the line. We have Liesel present. We have a signed board agenda. Can someone please? Give me the page, Naomi said. She wasn't looking at Roland. She was looking at Jonah. He laid the paper on the table without moving to the nearest empty chair because sitting down wasn't something he'd been invited to do. He pointed to the figure. This window ends before Q2 of last year. If Apex had a cluster event, a spike in adverse outcomes from new protocols they were piloting, it would fall in the quarter just before this window opens. Choosing 18 months ending in March is exactly how you cut that period out of your comparison baseline while still presenting it as representative data. One of the board members leaned forward. A cluster event. A pattern of deaths or complications occurring within a defined time frame that would significantly affect the statistical average if included. He caught himself. Sorry. It's the technical definition. Naomi's eyes stayed on him. Where did you learn that definition? Jonah glanced briefly toward the window where the city was beginning to lighten at the edges. Ohio State, biostatistics. I was 2 years into a PhD program. Roland repeated, voice sharpening into incredulity. You're a dropout statistician who happened to read our merger documents at, he checked his watch, 4 a.m. They were printing. I stacked them. And now you're auditing them. I'm asking someone to check one number. Jonah looked at Naomi steadily. If I'm wrong, you lose 5 minutes. If I'm right, you don't sign something that 40,000 people in this county are going to live with for the next 20 years. The room was quiet. On the screen, the Apex representatives had both gone very still. Naomi turned to her director of health informatics. Pull Apex's public CMS quality reporting, full network, past 4 years. The director blinked at her, then pulled her laptop closer. Roland folded his arms. This is a security guard's intuition versus a due diligence process that took 11 weeks. Then 11 weeks of work should survive 5 minutes of checking, Naomi answered. It took 9 minutes, not 5. The informatics director pulled the Centers for Medicare data first. Public records, available to anyone, never considered sensitive enough to surface in a private merger review. She found the Q1 and Q2 numbers from the prior year for 3 of Apex's flagship hospitals. Her face changed before she said anything. Their mortality rate spiked 34% in Q4 2 years ago, she said, across all 3 comparison sites, then dropped sharply. The window in this document cuts in exactly after the recovery. Roland said it was a statistical anomaly from staffing shortages, industry-wide pattern. Did Apex disclose the Q4 numbers during due diligence? Naomi asked. Roland answered too quickly. Everything we received was within scope of the agreed data package. That's not what I asked. Jonah was still standing near the side wall. He'd been looking at the numbers on the director's screen, and something else had caught him. Smaller, quieter, the same way the first one had. He moved a step closer without being invited, then stopped himself. Naomi noticed. Say it. Their accreditation renewal, he said. It was filed in March of last year. The same month the window closes. If there were corrective action plans attached to Q4 outcomes, they'd be embedded in that filing. He paused. Has anyone requested the full accreditation record? The informatics director was already typing. On the screen, the lead Apex representative leaned slightly forward. That documentation is proprietary to ongoing operational review. It's not standard. It's public record under Joint Commission disclosure requirements, Jonah said quietly, for any hospital seeking community trust metrics. The representative stopped speaking. Roland stood. This is outside your scope. You are a security officer. You have no standing in this room. He found it, the board member who'd leaned forward earlier said. Her name was Patricia Chow, and she had been on the board for 11 years and had never once in those years had reason to hear her own voice sound the way it did now. Whatever he found it. That matters. The accreditation file loaded. The corrective action rider was 23 pages long. By 8:45, the conference room smelled like cold coffee and adrenaline. The Apex representatives had stopped speaking. Their attorney had joined the video call and was visible only from the chin down, typing continuously into a separate screen. What the documents showed, collectively, was this. Apex Health Systems had entered 3 prior acquisitions with outcome data that consistently excluded a transitional quarter they internally called a protocol integration period. The euphemism appeared 3 times in internal communications the informatics team had now legally subpoenaed from prior merger filings in 2 other states. In plain terms, every time Apex absorbed a new hospital, outcomes worsened sharply during the first transition months. They had learned to choose comparison windows that made those months disappear. 40,000 people in Whitfield County would have become part of that transition. Naomi had not sat back down since the first number was confirmed. She stood at the end of the table, reading, asking questions in short, precise sentences, cutting off explanations that were clearly designed to last longer than they needed to. Roland kept insisting the corrective action plans were resolved, that Q4 was documented, disclosed within range, that communities across 7 states had successfully integrated with Apex networks. His voice had the quality of something structural under load, holding but not by much. Then Dr. Marcus Henley, the youngest person on the board, opened a treasury record that had been sitting in the shared drive since the beginning of due diligence. He'd opened it because Jonah, standing quietly near the wall, had asked whether anyone had cross-referenced the CFO's external consulting agreements with the Apex integration timeline. The question had been so specific that Henley assumed it meant something. It did. Roland Klein had received a $180,000 in consulting payments from a holding company called Bridgepoint Advisory Group over the 14 months that Apex had been pursuing Whitfield General. Bridgepoint's registered address matched a law firm with documented ties to Apex's parent corporation. The room understood what that meant before anyone said it. Roland stood immediately. That's a private financial relationship that has no bearing. Sit down, Naomi said. She said it the way a surgeon says it, not angry, not loud, simply final. He sat. At 9:03, Jonah's radio buzzed. He stepped back from the table and answered it quietly, thinking it was a floor check. It was Abby. Or rather, it was the break room landline, which meant Abby had woken up and figured out how to call the security channel, which was exactly the kind of thing she would do. Dad. Her voice was still thick with sleep and possibly with fever. Where are you? 5th floor. I'm okay. How do you feel? Hot. I know, sweetheart. I'll come down in a few minutes, okay? Is something wrong up there? He looked at the room around him. Board members leaning over screens, legal counsel on the phone, a CFO sitting very still in a chair he would not be sitting in much longer. Something was. I think it's getting better. He ended the call and found Naomi watching him from across the room. Your daughter? She asked. She's in the 3rd floor break room. She had a fever. I didn't have. He stopped. He wasn't in the habit of explaining his logistical failures to strangers. I brought her with me. She's fine. How old? 9. Naomi didn't pause. She pressed the intercom on the wall and asked her assistant to bring a pediatric nurse to the 3rd floor break room. Tell her it's the daughter of someone helping us this morning. Not a patient, just a kid who needs someone to sit with her. Jonah looked at the floor for a moment. The gesture landed somewhere he hadn't expected to leave open. That's not necessary. You're staying until this is finished, Naomi said simply, and I don't want you distracted. By 10:30, the evidence was organized enough that the board's legal counsel had formally recommended postponing any signature and initiating fraud review. The Apex representatives had disconnected from the call without notice. Their attorney had asked for a 72-hour pause to review disclosure obligations. Naomi had told them she'd be in touch. Roland had been asked to remain in the room with 2 members of legal and the board's independent counsel. He'd complied in the brittle, careful way of someone who understood that compliance was now the only move that didn't accelerate consequences. Jonah was standing near the side door, his radio quiet, the morning light now fully through the windows. He was thinking about Abby, thinking about whether the nurse had found her, thinking about the spelling worksheet and whether Abby had eaten anything when she woke up. Naomi came to stand beside him, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "Tell me where the degree went," she said finally. He looked at the window rather than at her. "My wife was diagnosed in my 2nd year. Ovarian cancer. Stage 3. He said it the way he'd learned to say it, directly without softening, because softening it made other people uncomfortable in ways that took longer to navigate than just the fact of it. "I left to help with treatments, to manage the bills. After she died, I had Abby and I had about 11 months of savings, and I had a half-finished dissertation that I hadn't looked at in 2 years. Naomi was quiet. "I took warehouse work, then a facilities job, then this because the schedule let me be the one who picked her up from school." He paused. "I don't regret it, that part I mean. But you still read biostatistics documents at 4 in the morning. Something almost like a smile moved across his face. "Numbers don't go away just because your life does." She studied him. "You saw something no one on my 11-week due diligence team saw." "They knew what they were looking for," he said. "I didn't know I was looking. Sometimes that's the difference." Dr. Henley appeared at Naomi's elbow, voice lowered. "We have a problem." Roland Klein was gone. Not from the room, from the floor. Sometime in the 20 minutes that legal had spent reviewing documents on separate devices and trusting that a 54-year-old CFO with a reputation would stay in a chair, Roland had moved to the service corridor and taken the freight elevator down. Jonah was out the side door before Henley finished the sentence. He didn't run exactly. His hip had bothered him since a warehouse injury 3 years ago, but he moved at the pace of someone who knew the building faster than anyone currently chasing him did. The freight elevator only went to 2 destinations from the 5th floor, loading dock level or the parking structure connected to the east wing. Roland was in dress shoes and a suit jacket. He wouldn't go to the loading dock. Jonah took the east stairwell. He came through the parking structure door just as Roland was reaching a silver sedan on the 2nd level. Roland turned at the sound of the door, and for a second his expression cycled through recognition, calculation, and something close to contempt. "Go back upstairs," Roland said. He had his keys out. His voice had the same cadence as the boardroom, but stripped of its audience now, smaller, tighter. "You don't understand what you've just done. Apex walking means this hospital closes in 8 months. You saved no one. You've just delayed the same ending." Jonah stood 12 feet away. "Then we find a different ending." "With what? Goodwill?" Roland yanked the car door open. "You can't fund a trauma center on a good story about a security guard and a printer." "Maybe not. But we can fund one without $180,000 going to the CFO who's supposed to be protecting it." Roland's jaw tightened. He got in the car. Jonah put his hand on the door before it closed. Roland shoved it hard. The edge caught Jonah's forearm, and pain shot clean up to his shoulder. But he held the door, and by the time Roland tried again, Naomi and 2 hospital security officers were coming through the east stairwell behind him. Roland looked at all 3 of them, then slowly let go of the door. He sat there for a moment, the engine not on, keys in his hand, the parking structure light making him look exactly as exhausted as he was. The authority had left his face somewhere between the 5th floor and here, and what remained was just a man who had calculated wrong about how much time he had. "There's nowhere to go where this doesn't follow you," Naomi said from 10 feet away. She wasn't out of breath. Her voice was the same temperature it had been all morning. He looked at Jonah once more. The kind of look that tries to diminish someone and discovers there's nothing left to aim at. Then he handed the keys to the nearest security officer and got out of the car. The board voted at 1:15 p.m. The merger agreement with Apex Health Systems was rejected, unanimously. Roland Klein was placed on immediate administrative leave pending criminal review. The State Attorney General's Health Fraud Division had been notified at 11 a.m. The Joint Commission had been forwarded the full accreditation file with the corrective action rider. 3 board members who had voted for the merger 6 weeks earlier, in a preliminary motion no one had publicly discussed, voted against it now without hesitation, because the same documents that had once told them one story now told them a different one entirely. Whitfield General was not saved, not yet, but it was no longer falling in the direction it had been falling 12 hours ago. The board authorized an emergency financial review and the appointment of independent forensic accountants. 3 regional hospital networks that had previously declined partnership inquiries had by afternoon agreed to begin preliminary conversations. It wasn't a rescue. It was the beginning of a fight that someone had been trying to prevent them from knowing they still had. When the formal session ended and the room began emptying in the slow, exhausted way of people who had been through something they hadn't expected, Naomi found Jonah in the hallway. He was eating a sandwich that someone on the catering staff had brought up around noon, the first thing he'd eaten since the previous evening. "Come back in for a minute," she said. She led him not to the main conference room, but to her private office, bookshelves along one wall, a window facing the hospital's interior courtyard where a few maintenance workers were moving slowly through the late afternoon. On her desk sat the merger agreement, still intact, unsigned. She picked it up, turned it once in her hands, set it in the shredder beside her filing cabinet and switched it on. The sound it made was quiet and final. "That's the version with Roland's fingerprints on it," she said. "We'll need a new process, a clean one." Jonah nodded. She turned to face him. "I want you on our data governance team, full-time. Salary commensurate with a senior analyst position. You set your own hours around your daughter's schedule." He didn't answer immediately. The offer was real enough that he needed a moment to let it be real. "I'd need to leave by 3:15 every day," he said, without exception. "Done. And if Abby's sick, I work from wherever she is." "Understood." He looked at the shredder, then back at her. "Before I say yes, the night staff, security and housekeeping. Half of them are contracted through a third-party agency. They work here every night with no health coverage from the hospital." He kept his voice level, not aggressive. "Just true. If this hospital is going to be worth saving, the people who know it best at 3 in the morning should be part of it." Naomi was quiet for a moment. "I'll take it to the board," she said. "That's all I'm asking." He accepted the offer. At 3:45 that afternoon, Jonah walked through the main lobby of Whitfield General with Abby beside him. Her fever had broken around noon. The pediatric nurse had found her, and apparently they had spent 2 hours playing cards and watching a nature documentary about migratory birds, which Abbott described in complete detail during the entire elevator ride down. She was wearing his jacket like a cape because she thought the lobby was too cold, and her backpack hung from one shoulder with the spelling worksheet sticking out at an angle. A few nurses near the reception desk looked up as he passed. He could see it in the way they held the look a half-second longer than usual. The quiet acknowledgement that something had happened today, and that the man crossing the lobby in a security uniform with his daughter attached to his side had something to do with it. No one said anything. One of them nodded. Abby looked up at him as they pushed through the main doors into the afternoon. The air outside was cooler than she expected, and she pressed closer to his arm. "Dad." "Yeah." "Did you get in trouble today?" He thought about Roland's look in the parking garage, about Naomi feeding the merger agreement into the shredder, about a number on page 8 of a document that had been printing onto a tray in an empty hallway at 4 in the morning, waiting for someone who could still read it. "No," he said, "I got something right." She considered this with the seriousness that 9-year-olds reserve for information they intend to keep. Then, was it the math kind of right or the other kind? "Both," he said. She seemed satisfied with that. She took his hand, and they walked out into the parking lot together, the hospital's glass face reflecting the late sun behind them, and somewhere on the 5th floor of that building, 40 years of someone's work was still standing. Not because of a signature, but because a man who had given up everything except the ability to notice what didn't belong had been awake at the right hour, in the right hallway, holding a stack of papers no one else thought to read.